At lunch, my daughter said, "At least Dad's new wife doesn't yell all the time like you did." I stayed quiet. The fork froze halfway to my mouth. Emma's words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot, and I felt something crack inside my chest. She said it so casually, twirling her spaghetti around her fork as if she'd just commented on the weather. But those words, those 12 devastating words, hit me with the force of a freight train. "At least Dad's new wife doesn't yell all the time like you did." The restaurant buzzed around us, filled with the chatter of other families enjoying their Sunday lunch. A child laughed at the table next to us. Someone clinked their glass in a toast. Life moved on, but I was frozen, staring at my 15-year-old daughter who had just delivered what felt like a death sentence to my heart. I set my fork down carefully, my hands trembling just enough that I had to grip the edge of the table. Emma continued eating, oblivious to the bomb she'd just dropped. Or maybe she wasn't oblivious. Maybe this was intentional. Maybe she'd been waiting for the right moment to twist the knife that had been lodged in my chest since the divorce 2 years ago. "Emma," I started, then stopped. What could I say? That she was wrong? That I didn't yell all the time? But the truth was, I did yell. I yelled when she left her shoes in the middle of the hallway. I yelled when she forgot to do her homework. I yelled when she came home 10 minutes past curfew. I yelled because I was drowning, and yelling felt like the only way to stay above water. She looked up at me then, her green eyes, so much like her father's, meeting mine with a mixture of defiance and something else. Hurt? Disappointment? I couldn't tell anymore. When had my daughter become a stranger to me? "I didn't mean it to sound mean," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "It's just different at Dad's house. Peaceful, you know?" Peaceful. The word stung worse than the original comment. My home, our home, wasn't peaceful. It was a battlefield, and I was the soldier who never stopped fighting, even when the fight was over. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I wanted to reach across the table and take her hand, to explain that the yelling wasn't about her, that it was about me and all the broken pieces inside me that I didn't know how to fix. But the words stuck in my throat like shards of glass. "Mom," Emma's voice was softer now, and I realized I'd been staring at my plate for too long. "Are you okay?" Was I okay? I'd been asking myself that question for 2 years, and I still didn't have an answer. How could I be okay when my daughter preferred the company of her father and his new wife? How could I be okay when I'd become the villain in my own child story? "I'm fine," I lied, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "Just thinking." Emma nodded, but I could see the worry creeping into her expression. She was always sensitive to conflict, always the peacemaker. Even as a toddler, she'd burst into tears whenever her father and I raised our voices. She'd stand between us, her little hands pressed against our legs, begging us to stop fighting. I thought we were protecting her by keeping our worst arguments behind closed doors, but maybe we weren't protecting her at all. Maybe we were just teaching her that love and anger were the same thing. The waiter appeared at our table, asking if we needed anything else. I shook my head, suddenly desperate to leave this place where my daughter had unknowingly shattered what was left of my heart. But as I reached for my purse, Emma spoke again. "Dad's thinking about having another baby." The words hit me like a second wave, and I felt my breath catch. Another baby. Michael was going to have another baby with his perfect, non-yelling wife. A fresh start. A clean slate. A chance to be the father he never was with Emma, in a home where voices stayed soft and love didn't sound like criticism. I fumbled with my wallet, pulling out cash with shaking hands. That's nice for them. "Are you mad?" Emma asked, and I could hear the fear in her voice. She was bracing herself for another explosion, another moment where her mother's emotions would fill the room like toxic smoke. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table and demand to know why her father got to start over while I was stuck being the angry ex-wife, the cautionary tale, the woman who yelled too much. I wanted to tell her that I'd given up everything for her father, my dreams, my career, my sense of self, only to watch him walk away and build a better life with someone else. But instead, I smiled. It felt like my face might crack from the effort, but I smiled. "I'm not mad," I said, and it was another lie. I was furious. I was devastated. I was drowning in a sea of emotions I couldn't name, let alone understand. "I'm happy for them. For you. You'll be a great big sister." Emma's face lit up, and for a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "Really? You're not upset?" "Really?" I lied again, and I realized that lying to my daughter had become as natural as breathing. How many times had I told her I was fine when I was falling apart? How many times had I pretended that her father's betrayal hadn't left me gasping for air? As we left the restaurant, Emma chattering excitedly about baby names and nursery colors, I felt the weight of her words settling into my bones. I was the yelling mother. I was the difficult one. I was the problem that needed to be solved, the storm that everyone was relieved to escape. But as we walked to the car, I caught our reflection in the restaurant window. Emma was animated, gesturing wildly as she talked, but I looked hollow, empty, like a ghost of the woman I used to be. And that's when I realized the truth that had been hiding in plain sight all along. I didn't know who I was anymore. The woman who yelled, who fought, who couldn't seem to find peace. That wasn't who I'd always been. That was who I'd become. And if I didn't figure out how to change, I was going to lose my daughter forever. The drive home was quiet, Emma lost in her phone and her dreams of being a big sister. But my mind was racing, replaying every argument, every raised voice, every moment when I'd chosen anger over understanding. I'd been so focused on surviving the divorce, on rebuilding my life, that I'd forgotten to rebuild myself. As I pulled into our driveway, I made a decision. I couldn't change the past, couldn't take back the yelling or the tears or the years of walking on eggshells. But I could change what came next. I could figure out who I was beneath all the anger and hurt. I owed Emma that much. I owed myself that much. The question was it too late? That night, after Emma went to bed, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea that had gone cold hours ago. The house was quiet, too quiet. It had been like this for 2 years now, ever since Michael moved out. The silence used to feel like freedom, but now it felt like a prison where my thoughts echoed off the walls, growing louder and more accusatory with each pass. I stared at the family photo still hanging on the refrigerator, the one from Emma's 13th birthday. We looked happy in that picture, Michael's arm around my shoulders, Emma blowing out candles, all of us smiling. But I remembered what happened an hour after that photo was taken. Michael had snapped at me for buying the wrong cake mix, and I'd exploded. In front of Emma, in front of the guests. The party had ended with me locked in the bathroom, crying, while Michael played the role of the apologetic husband cleaning up his wife's mess. That was the pattern. It had always been the pattern, but I'd been too blind to see it. I walked to the window and looked out at the house across the street where the Johnsons lived. They'd been married for 30 years, and I'd never once heard them raise their voices. Mrs. Johnson would wave at me from her garden, always smiling, always serene. I used to think she was just lucky to have married a good man. Now I wondered if the difference wasn't in the men we married, but in the women we became. The truth was, I hadn't always been the yelling woman. When Michael and I first met, I was soft-spoken, gentle. I believed in talking things through in compromise. I believed in love as a sanctuary, not a battlefield. But somewhere along the way, I'd lost that woman. She'd been buried under years of feeling unheard, unseen, unloved. It started small. Michael would come home from work and barely acknowledge me. When I tried to tell him about my day, he'd scroll through his phone or turn on the TV. When I'd suggest we spend time together, he'd say he was too tired. When I'd express frustration about anything, the bills, Emma's school, my job, he'd dismiss it with a wave of his hand. "You're being dramatic," he'd say. "It's not that big of a deal." But it was a big deal. To me, it was everything. I'd started raising my voice just to be heard. If I spoke softly, he'd ignore me. If I spoke normally, he'd half listen. But if I yelled, he'd finally look up from his phone and pay attention. The yelling became my currency, the only way to purchase a moment of his focus. The worst part was I knew it was wrong. I'd lie awake at night, listening to Michael's steady breathing, and hate myself for becoming someone I didn't recognize. I'd promised myself that tomorrow would be different, that I'd find a way to communicate without raising my voice. But the next day would come, and Michael would dismiss me again, and the anger would bubble up like lava from a volcano I couldn't control. I'd tried everything. I'd written him letters explaining how I felt, but he'd skim them and say I was overthinking. I'd suggested marriage counseling, but he'd said we didn't need it. I'd bought self-help books and hid them in my nightstand, reading them like secret prayers. But nothing worked because I was trying to fix a problem that required two people, and I was the only one who thought we were broken. The betrayal came on a Tuesday. I found the messages on his phone, months of conversations with Sarah, his coworker. They weren't just having an affair, they were having a relationship. They talked about their days, their dreams, their future together. He gave her the attention he'd been withholding from me, the gentle words I'd been starving for. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He didn't even seem sorry. He just looked at me with those green eyes, the same ones Emma had inherited, and said, "Can you really blame me? Living with you is like walking on eggshells. Sarah doesn't yell at me every day." That's when I understood. I hadn't become the yelling woman because I was broken. I'd become the yelling woman because I was desperate. I'd been drowning in a marriage where my voice didn't matter, and yelling was the only way to prove I still existed. But Emma hadn't seen any of that. She'd only seen the aftermath, the raised voices, the slammed doors, the tears that came after the fights. She'd seen her mother as the problem, not the symptom. And now she preferred the peaceful home where her father lived with his new wife, the woman who got the version of Michael that I'd begged for but never received. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through photos of Emma, stopping at one from last Christmas. She was opening presents at Michael's house, Sarah's arm around her shoulders, both of them laughing. Emma looked relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in years. Happy. Free. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My daughter was better off without me. No, that wasn't right. My daughter was better off without the person I'd become. The question was, could I find my way back to who I used to be? Could I dig through the layers of anger and hurt and find the woman who believed in gentle words and quiet strength? I thought about Mrs. Johnson across the street, about her peaceful garden and her 30-year marriage. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe I could learn to be different. Maybe I could show Emma that strength didn't have to sound like shouting. But first, I had to understand something that had been haunting me for 2 years. Had I always been the problem, or had I just been the only one fighting for a marriage that was already finished? The answer to that question would change everything. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My reflection in the bathroom mirror showed a woman I barely recognized, hollow cheeks, dark circles under my eyes, hair that had lost its shine somewhere between the divorce papers and the custody arrangements. When had I become so broken? Emma was already at the kitchen table, eating cereal and scrolling through her phone. She looked up when I entered, and I saw something flicker across her face. Was it concern? Or was she just checking to see if I was going to have another episode? "Morning, sweetheart," I said, my voice carefully modulated. I'd been practicing this, keeping my tone level, my words soft. It felt like performing, like I was playing a character called Calm Mother, while the real me screamed from behind a glass wall. "Morning," she replied, then quickly looked back at her phone. The distance between us felt like an ocean. I poured myself coffee and sat across from her, watching her eat. She was so beautiful, so much like the girl I used to be before life taught me that soft voices got trampled and gentle hearts got broken. I wanted to reach out and touch her face, to tell her all the things I'd been holding back. But how could I explain that the mother she saw, the one who yelled and slammed doors, wasn't the real me? How could I make her understand that I'd been drowning for years, and anger was the only thing that kept me afloat? "Emma," I started, then stopped. She looked up expectantly, and I realized I had no idea what I wanted to say. "How do you tell your 15-year-old daughter that you've been pretending to be strong when you've actually been falling apart? How do you explain that every raised voice was really a cry for help?" "What, Mom?" she asked, and I heard the slight edge in her voice. She was bracing herself, preparing for whatever emotional minefield I was about to walk us through. I took a breath, trying to find words that wouldn't sound like excuses. "I want you to know that I love you, more than anything." She nodded, but I could see the confusion in her eyes. "I know that, Mom. I love you too." But did she? Or did she love the idea of me, the mother she thought she was supposed to love? Because the truth was, I'd been hiding behind my anger for so long that I wasn't sure Emma had ever really seen me. The real me. The woman who stayed up all night when she was sick, who memorized every word of her favorite bedtime stories, who cried happy tears at every school play and soccer game. All Emma saw was the aftermath, the yelling, the tension, the way I'd snap when the pressure became too much. She didn't see the nights I'd lie awake wondering if I was ruining her childhood. She didn't see how I'd bite my tongue 100 times a day, swallowing words that wanted to escape. She didn't see me crying in the shower, trying to wash away the guilt and shame that clung to me like a second skin. After she left for school, I found myself in her room, something I rarely did anymore. It used to be our sanctuary, the place where we'd read together and talk about her day. Now it felt like foreign territory, filled with posters of bands I didn't recognize and books I'd never heard of. When had we stopped sharing our worlds with each other? I sat on her bed and noticed a journal on her nightstand. I knew I shouldn't, but something desperate inside me reached for it. I needed to know what she really thought, what she really felt about me. My hands shook as I opened it to a random page. Mom yelled at me again today because I forgot to take out the trash. I hate it when she gets like that. Her face gets all red and scary, and I just want to disappear. I wish I could live at Dad's house all the time. Sarah never yells. She just talks to me like I'm a real person, not a problem that needs to be solved. The words hit me like physical blows. I flipped to another page, and another, each entry a knife to my heart. I think Mom hates me sometimes. She looks at me like I'm disappointing her, like I'm not good enough. I try to be perfect, but I always mess something up. Sarah asked me about my hobbies today. When was the last time Mom asked me about anything except homework and chores? I heard Mom crying in her room last night. I wanted to go to her, but I was scared she'd yell at me for bothering her. I hate that I'm scared of my own mother. I closed the journal and sat there, shaking. This was how my daughter saw me. Not as a mother, but as a threat. Not as someone who loved her, but as someone to be feared and avoided. I'd become the villain in her story, the one she had to tiptoe around and manage. But the worst part was that she was right. I had been treating her like a problem to be solved instead of a person to be known. I'd been so focused on rules and discipline and trying to maintain control that I'd forgotten to actually connect with her. I'd been so busy being the responsible parent that I'd forgotten to be the loving one. The realization crushed me. I hadn't just lost my marriage. I'd lost my daughter too. And unlike Michael, who'd simply walked away, Emma was trapped here with me, counting down the days until she could escape to her father's peaceful house. I thought about Sarah, about how she'd stepped into my life and done everything I'd failed to do. She'd made my home feel like a sanctuary instead of a command center. She'd given my daughter the mother I'd always meant to be, but somehow never figured out how to become. Sitting in Emma's room, surrounded by the evidence of how badly I'd failed, I realized something that made my chest tight with panic. I was running out of time. In 3 years, Emma would be 18. She'd go to college, build her own life, and I'd become a distant memory, the difficult mother she'd visit out of obligation. Unless I found a way to change. Unless I found a way to show her who I really was underneath all the anger and fear and pain. The question was, did I have the courage to let her see me vulnerable? Did I have the strength to tear down the walls I'd built around my heart? And most importantly, would she still love me when she saw the broken woman behind the angry mask? The next evening, I waited for Emma in the living room, my hands shaking as I held a cup of tea that had gone cold an hour ago. I'd been rehearsing this conversation all day, but every version ended with me either breaking down in tears or Emma walking away. Still, I knew I had to try. I couldn't live with the woman in her journal entries, the scary mother who made her own daughter want to disappear. Emma came through the front door at exactly 5:30, her backpack slung over one shoulder, earbuds in her ears. She moved through the house like she was trying to be invisible, the way children do when they're afraid of setting off a landmine. "Emma," I called softly, "can we talk?" She froze, and I saw her shoulders tense. This was it, the moment she braced herself for whatever emotional storm I was about to unleash. But instead of her usual defensive posture, she just looked tired, exhausted, like she'd been carrying a weight that was too heavy for her 15-year-old shoulders. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked, and the question broke my heart. This was her default assumption, that any conversation with me meant she was in trouble.
No, sweetheart.
"You didn't do anything wrong." "I did." I patted the couch next to me. "Please, just sit with me for a minute." She sat on the far end of the couch, as far away from me as possible while still technically complying with my request. The distance between us felt like a canyon, but I forced myself to start anyway. "I need to tell you something," I began, my voice barely above a whisper, "about why I've been the way I've been." Emma's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't speak. She was waiting for the other shoe to drop, for this to turn into another lecture about her grades, or her attitude, or her messy room. "I know you think I'm just angry all the time," I continued. "And you're right. I have been. But it's not because of you, Emma. It's never been because of you." I took a shaky breath, trying to find the words I'd been practicing all day. "When your father and I were married, I felt invisible, like I was screaming into a void and no one could hear me. I tried to talk to him about my day, my feelings, my dreams, and he'd just dismiss me. Tell me I was being dramatic or overthinking things." Emma shifted uncomfortably, and I realized she'd probably heard this story before from her father's perspective. The narrative where I was the difficult wife, the one who made mountains out of molehills. "I know what your father told you," I said quietly, "that I was always causing problems, always picking fights. And maybe that's how it looked. But what he didn't tell you is that I spent years trying to be heard without raising my voice. I wrote letters, I suggested counseling, I tried so many different ways to reach him. But the only time he'd actually listen to me was when I yelled." I saw something flicker in Emma's eyes, not understanding exactly, but maybe the beginning of it. So I started yelling more. Not because I wanted to, but because it was the only way to get his attention. And then it became a habit, this awful pattern I couldn't break. Even after the divorce, even after he was gone, I kept yelling because I'd forgotten how to communicate any other way. Emma was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her processing this information. "But you yell at me," she said finally. "I never ignored you." The truth of that hit me like a physical blow. "You're right," I whispered. "You never ignored me. You always listened, even when I didn't deserve it."
But I was so broken, Emma.
I was so hurt and angry and lost that I couldn't tell the difference between someone who was dismissing me and someone who was just being 15. I watched her face, looking for any sign that she understood. "I took out all my pain on you, and that's not fair. It's not your fault that your father broke my heart. It's not your fault that I didn't know how to heal from it." "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Emma asked, and I heard something different in her voice. Not anger, exactly, but confusion. Maybe even a hint of compassion. "Because I was ashamed," I admitted. "Because I thought if I showed you how broken I was, you'd think less of me. Parents are supposed to be strong, right? We're supposed to have all the answers. But the truth is, I've been drowning for years, and I've been pulling you down with me." Emma was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. "I thought you hated me sometimes." The words shattered something inside me.
"Oh, Emma, no.
Never. I love you more than my own life." Every harsh word, every time I raised my voice, it was never about you. It was about me and my own pain that I didn't know how to handle. I scooted closer to her on the couch, and for the first time in months, she didn't pull away. "I know I can't take back the yelling or the years of making you feel like you had to walk on eggshells around me. But I want you to know that the woman you see, the one who gets angry and scary, that's not who I really am. That's who I became when I was hurting. Then who are you really? Emma asked, and I realized it was the first real question she'd asked me in years. I thought about it for a moment. I'm the woman who used to read you bedtime stories and do all the voices. I'm the one who stayed up all night when you had pneumonia, holding you and singing lullabies. I'm the mother who cried at your first piano recital because I was so proud of you. I'm still that person, Emma. I just lost myself for a while. She nodded slowly, and I saw tears gathering in her eyes. I miss that mom, she whispered. She's still here, I promised. She's been here all along, just buried under all the hurt and anger. But I'm going to find her again. I'm going to get help, and I'm going to learn how to be the mother you deserve. Emma looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Hope. It won't be easy, I continued. I've got a lot of work to do on myself, but I want you to know that every day I'm going to try to be better. Not just for you, but for me too, because I'm tired of being angry. I'm tired of being the person everyone wants to escape from. For the first time in months, Emma moved closer to me on the couch. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that I could feel her warmth. I don't want to escape from you, Mom, she said quietly. I just want you to be okay. And that's when I realized the most important truth of all. My daughter didn't need me to be perfect. She just needed me to be real. The conversation with Emma didn't magically fix everything. The next morning, I still felt the urge to snap when she left her bowl in the sink, but something was different. Instead of letting the anger build until it exploded, I took a breath and simply said, Emma, could you please rinse your bowl? She looked at me with surprise, as if she'd been expecting the usual tirade, then quietly went back and cleaned it. It was such a small moment, but it felt like a victory. That afternoon, I did something I'd been putting off for months. I called Dr. Martinez, the therapist my family doctor had recommended after the divorce. Her office was in a quiet building downtown with soft lighting and plants that actually looked healthy. When I sat across from her for the first time, I felt like I was 15 again, nervous and unsure of where to start. What brought you here today? She asked gently. I'm losing my daughter, I said, and then the floodgates opened. I told her about the lunch, about Emma's journal, about the years of anger that had consumed me like a wildfire. I told her about Michael and Sarah and the baby that was coming, about feeling like a failure in every role I'd ever tried to play. Dr. Martinez listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions that made me think deeper about my responses. When you yell, she said during our second session, what do you feel right before it happens? I had to think about that. Panic, I said finally, like I'm drowning and no one can see me going under. That's your nervous system responding to perceived threat, she explained. Your brain learned that raising your voice was a survival strategy. Now, we need to teach it new ways to feel safe. The work was harder than I'd expected. Dr. Martinez gave me exercises, breathing techniques, ways to recognize when my anger was building before it exploded. She had me write letters to my younger self, to the woman who'd entered her marriage believing in fairy tales and partnership. Some days I felt like I was making progress. Others, I felt like I was drowning all over again. 3 weeks into therapy, I had my first real test. Emma came home an hour late from school without calling, something that would have sent me into a rage spiral just a month before. I felt the familiar heat rising in my chest, the words forming on my tongue like weapons ready to fire. But instead of yelling, I remembered what Dr. Martinez had taught me. I took 3 deep breaths, counted to 10, and asked myself what I was really feeling underneath the anger.
Fear.
I was scared something had happened to her. Hurt. I felt like she didn't care enough to let me know she was safe. When Emma walked through the door, expecting a storm, I surprised us both. I was worried about you, I said simply. When you're late and don't call, I imagine all sorts of terrible things happening. Emma stopped in her tracks, clearly braced for an explosion that didn't come. My phone died, and I was at the library with Jess working on our history project. I forgot to check the time. Thank you for telling me, I said. Next time, Maybe you could use the library phone to let me know?
Yeah, she said slowly.
I can do that. She started to head upstairs, then turned back.
Mom?
Are you feeling okay?
I almost laughed.
I'm feeling like myself for the first time in years. The changes were small but significant. Instead of monitoring Emma's every move, I started asking about her day, really asking, not just checking off parental obligation boxes. I learned that she was struggling with her chemistry teacher, that she had a crush on a boy named Tyler, that she was thinking about trying out for the drama club but was scared she wasn't good enough. You know, I told her one evening as we cleaned up dinner together, I was in drama club in high school. Really? Emma looked genuinely surprised. You never told me that. I played Emily in our town, I said, smiling at the memory. I was terrified on opening night, but your grandmother, your Nana, she told me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing something even when you're scared. Emma was quiet for a moment. I think I want to try out, she said finally. I think you should. But the biggest change was in how Emma looked at me. The wariness was still there. Trust, I was learning, took time to rebuild, but there were moments when I caught glimpses of the little girl who used to curl up next to me for bedtime stories. She started lingering in the kitchen after dinner instead of immediately disappearing to her room. She asked me to help her with her English essay, something she hadn't done in over a year. One evening, about 6 weeks after our big conversation, Emma found me in the living room reading. Mom, she said, settling onto the couch next to me. Can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think Dad and Sarah's baby will be better than me? Like, will Dad finally have the kid he actually wanted? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I set down my book and turned to face her fully. Emma, look at me. Your father getting a second chance at parenting doesn't mean his first chance was a failure. You are not a practice run for someone else's happiness. Her eyes filled with tears. But what if he's different with the baby? What if he's the kind of dad with them that he never was with me? I thought about lying, about giving her false reassurance. But our relationship was built on honesty now. He might be, I said gently. People change, and sometimes they learn from their mistakes. But that says nothing about your worth, Emma. That says nothing about how much you deserve to be loved. Were you different before? She asked. Before you and Dad started fighting all the time? Yes, I said honestly. I was softer, more patient. I believed the best about people instead of expecting the worst. I wish I could have met that version of you. I reached over and took her hand, and for the first time in months, she didn't pull away. You can, I said. She's still here. It's just taking some time for her to remember how to come out. Emma squeezed my hand, and I felt something shift between us. Not a complete healing, we still had work to do, but a beginning. A foundation we could build on. I love you, Mom, she said quietly. I love you too, sweetheart. So much it sometimes scares me. As we sat there together, I realized that healing wasn't about erasing the past or pretending the hurt had never happened. It was about choosing every single day to be better than the pain that had shaped us. It was about showing Emma that people could change, that love could be gentle, that home could be a sanctuary instead of a battlefield. We still had a long way to go, but for the first time in years, I had hope. 3 months later, I stood in the wings of Emma's high school auditorium, watching my daughter transform into Lady Macbeth on stage. She'd gotten the lead role in the fall production, and I could barely contain my pride. Her voice carried across the theater with a confidence I hadn't seen in years, and I found myself crying happy tears for the first time since the divorce. She's incredible, whispered Mrs. Patterson, another parent. You must be so proud. I am, I said, meaning it with every fiber of my being. After the show, Emma found me in the lobby, still in her costume, her face glowing with excitement and stage makeup. Without hesitation, she threw her arms around me, and I held her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair and the lingering smell of theater dust. You were absolutely brilliant, I told her, pulling back to look at her face. I was mesmerized from the first word. Really, she beamed. I was so nervous, but then I remembered what you said about Nana and courage, and I just went for it. The mention of my mother made my heart swell. I'd been sharing more stories about Emma's grandmother lately, stories about strength and resilience, and the kind of woman I was trying to become again. Emma had been drinking them in like someone dying of thirst. "Mom," Emma said, her voice dropping to something more serious. "Dad and Sarah are here. They came to see the show." I looked across the lobby and saw them. Michael with his arm around Sarah's growing belly, both of them scanning the crowd. My first instinct was the familiar clench of anxiety, the old pattern of bracing for conflict. But instead of the crushing weight I used to feel, I just felt neutral. They were part of Emma's life, and that was okay. "That's wonderful," I said and meant it. "I'm glad they got to see how talented you are." Emma studied my face, as if checking for signs of the old me, the one who would have made sarcastic comments or found reasons to leave early. "You're really okay with this?" "I'm really okay," I said, surprised by how true it felt. "This is your night, Em. You deserve to have everyone who loves you here to celebrate." Michael spotted us and approached cautiously, Sarah beside him. The last time we'd all been in the same room was at Emma's birthday 2 months ago, and while that evening had gone smoothly, there was still an awkwardness between us that probably always would be there. "Emma, you are fantastic," Michael said, giving her a hug. "We're so proud of you." "Thanks, Dad." Emma looked between her parents, and I could see her unconsciously holding her breath, waiting for tension that didn't come. "Sarah, you look wonderful," I said, nodding toward her belly. "How are you feeling?" Sarah looked surprised by the genuine warmth in my voice. "Thank you. I'm doing well. The baby's very active, keeps me up at night." "I remember that," I said with a small smile. "Emma used to do gymnastics in there at 2 a.m. "I did not," Emma protested, laughing. "You absolutely did. Your father used to put his hand on my belly and try to calm you down by talking to you." Michael looked surprised that I'd shared a positive memory involving him. "It never worked," he said with a tentative smile. "She was stubborn even then." "Still am," Emma said proudly, and we all laughed. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, light, easy talk about the play and Emma's performance. When it was time to leave, Sarah surprised me by touching my arm gently. "Thank you," she said quietly so only I could hear, "for making this okay. I know it's not always easy." I looked at her, this woman who had stepped into my life and given my daughter the peace I'd been unable to provide. For so long, I'd seen her as the enemy, the symbol of everything I'd lost. But looking at her now, I realized she was just another woman trying to love the people in her life the best way she knew how. "Emma deserves to have as many people loving her as possible," I said. "That includes you." The drive home was quiet, but it was a comfortable quiet. Emma sat in the passenger seat, still buzzing with post-performance energy, occasionally humming bits of songs from the play. "Mom," she said as we pulled into our driveway, "thank you for tonight. For being you. The real you. Thank you for giving me the chance to be her again." As we walked into the house together, I marveled at how different this place felt now. The walls that had once echoed with arguments now held laughter and conversation. The kitchen where I used to eat my silent dinners had become a place where Emma and I cooked together, trying new recipes and talking about everything and nothing. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Martinez. "How did tonight go?" "Better than I could have imagined," I typed back. "I think we're going to be okay." Later that night, as I tucked Emma into bed, something I hadn't done in years, but that she'd started asking for again, she looked up at me with those green eyes that were so much like her father's, but somehow completely her own. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she said quietly, "for getting help, for changing, for not giving up on us." "I'm proud of you too," I said, smoothing her hair back from her face, "for being patient with me while I figured out how to be your mother again, for not giving up on me either." "I love you," she said, and this time there was no hesitation in her voice, no careful distance. Just love, pure and simple. "I love you too, sweetheart. Sweet dreams." As I turned off her light and closed her door, I realized that we'd done something I hadn't thought possible 6 months ago. We'd found our way back to each other. Not to who we were before, that version of us was gone forever, but to something new. Something stronger because it was built on truth instead of pretense, on understanding instead of assumptions. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth. Emma would still be a teenager, with all the challenges that brought. I would still have bad days, moments when the old patterns tried to resurface. But we had something now that we'd never had before. The knowledge that love could be rebuilt, that relationships could heal, and that it was never too late to become the person you were meant to be. Walking past the family photo still hanging on the refrigerator, I didn't feel the usual pang of loss. Instead, I felt grateful for the journey that had brought us here, for the daughter who'd had the courage to tell me the truth, and for the second chance we'd given each other. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, my daughter was safe in her bed, and for the first time in years, my house felt like a home.